Hello, you're hearing the voice of Patricia Angelin, and you are at All the Feels. I am here in New York, and I am, of course, Alba Technique. And I wanted to share with you initially today a wonderful quote that I've been meaning to share with you for a while by Charles Darwin, in which he's talking about art and about approaching art and the emotional part of himself. And as you know, Charles Darwin, the scientist in the 19th century, was very, very interested in emotion. And I quote, "If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music, at least once a week, for perhaps the parts of my brain now atrophied would thus have been kept active through use. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness and may possibly be injurious to the intellect and more probably to the moral character by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature." End quote. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882. Enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. So he was right in line with the quote that spurred this whole series, which was, of course, Goethe. One ought what is it? Oh, shoot, I always go to do it and it was there and then it goes away. One ought at least to hear a little melody every day, read a fine poem, see a good picture, and, if possible, make a few sensible remarks. End quote. Wolfgang Goethe. And I think that it was understood that the arts, music, and all of the visual arts, and also all of the literary arts, are important to the development of the human person. And they're also important to the handling of our emotions, to the managing of our emotions. And so we had started out when we were answering questions on emotions in this series with the Goethe quote, right, in front at the top of things. And so that Goethe quote was visual for you, that hear a melody, read a fine poem, see a fine picture, and if possible, make a few sensible remarks, which when I first saw that years ago made me giggle. And that was, so that was part of it. And then I thought, what's lacking in me is a knowledge of poetry. I have a little bit, but I thought this is the way to broaden me, like Charles Darwin said, to keep the parts of my brain from atrophying, to help me in a whole new way to me to manage my emotions. So we've been thus started the whole poetry series. So that leads me to the poems for today. The poems for today are all over the place, mainly because I've been emotionally all over the place. Only yesterday I was talking to a very, very, very dear friend who just lost someone to COVID, but also to leukemia, and his reaction was rather an extreme anger. And while we know by the Kubler-Ross work, psychology, Florence Kubler-Ross, that there are all of these different stages of grief, and one of them is anger. Anger always pivots around something specific. So in our anxiety in regards to this pandemic, if somebody dies and there's even a possibility that one of the aspects of it is because of COVID, then the first thing that can come up can be anger, and a rather extreme anger. And at the person for, why didn't you get vaccinated? You wouldn't be dead. Well, that might not actually be true. Indeed, in the case of this individual that I am thinking of, it probably wasn't true, because the individual did have cancer and was also well into 80s. So it's quite possible that this was simply this individual's time. And I know that I had a breakthrough infection, even though I was vaccinated, and vaccinated twice. So You know, but these things, because of our anxieties, which are very, very real, we are having emotional reactivity from within the emotion, the primitive emotion of fear. Every single one of us, all over the world, just varying according to our particular circumstances. And his was anger. And so I went to sleep last night and I woke up. I must have been having some kind of a dream that I do not remember. But oh my goodness, was I angry? I was so angry that I had to get up. I had to walk. I had to take a drink of water. I'm like, okay, Pat, what is this about? And I got angry at death. Angry at death. Which is not a stupid thing. I mean, we don't want there to be death. And in our particular generation, we are not any longer accustomed to death happening in the ways that our ancestors, even in like my grandparents, probably your great-grandparents' time, were prior to the existence of antibiotics, prior to a lot of vaccines. You know, prior to all of these things, you know, you were losing Social Security. You know, people didn't live much past 65 normally because of very hard lives. They, you know, people died in their 60s, people died in their 50s, people died in their 30s, lots of people. People died in infancy and early childhood. So death was something that was not considered to be an abnormal thing like we do now. And I think that when death does come into our lives, it makes it emotionally not more difficult than it was in previous generations, but differently difficult. And so I thought today I wanted to read a poem on death, which is not morbid. It's really not. And poetry can, because of the conciseness of it, the concision, the beauty of the words, the way it can hit us emotionally, can be an excellent way for us to deal with our angers, with our depressions, and sadnesses, and with our anxieties and our fears. So I have one poem about death, one poem about love, and one, because of course we have February 14th coming up, and one poem that I haven't even looked at, which is by Dickinson, that fell out of the book I am reading from and has this childish handwriting, which was my own handwriting when I was very, 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 very young. And I'm going to turn the camera around now so that when I show it to you, it's not backwards. Isn't that the sweetest thing? You can just tell that a teenage girl wrote this thing. And I don't know whether I have any other ones or not. There we go. Sorry about that. Somebody called in. There it is. Isn't that sweet? So that will be our last poem. So as is usual, looking at this beautiful picture, I would ask you to simply look at the beautiful candle and at the evergreens that are there, and listen. Open up your faculty of hearing and listen to these three beautiful pieces of verse, none of which are very long. And then later you might feel inspired to Google them and to read them in your own mind, to see them, to read them in your own mind, and then read it out loud to yourself or to someone else in your own voice. That way you really encounter the piece of poetry through the oral faculty, through the oral faculty, through the visual faculty, and through the verbal. You will feel in your body the vibrations of the words, and it really is very assistive to the limbic system, to the emotional system, to do this, I have found. So here we are to begin. Death, Be Not Proud, by John Donne. John Donne was writing this, I think, in 1609. This was a time when people would die right and left. And it is a sonnet. And he is addressing death as though death is a person. Death, be not proud. by Donne. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy picture be, much pleasure then from thee, much more must flow, and sooneth our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. Whoa, that moved me. Death, thou shalt die. Amazing. I had certainly not expected that. The other is very beautiful. If you want to think about true love and eternity, and I think one can do no better than Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and in this case, Robert Browning. And this little poem is very, very well known. It is in a little book I mentally saw in the eye of my mind in the middle of the night when I was so angry. And this book is one that my dad gave me. Best loved poems of all times, illustrated with famous paintings and drawings. And sometimes it seems to me that the paintings and drawings don't go at all with the poem. This one has a Renoir with it. And it is Renoir, isn't it? Yes, it is. And it is Robert Browning, and I think it'd make a great way to propose marriage to somebody. And it is Grow Old Along With Me. Grow Old Along With Me by Robert Browning. Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be, the last of life, for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand, who saith, a whole I planned. Youth shows but half. Trust God, see all, nor be afraid. I thought that was rather wonderful. And I think that that would be, as I said, a great way to propose marriage to someone. Grow old with me, because most people who get married are young and don't even think about age, but what it speaks to is longevity. And also, of course, he does get a little metaphysical, and also to eternity. So the other one that I wanted to read you is If I Can Stop One Heart from Breaking, which is really about what all the feels here is about. Here we are. If I Can Stop One Heart from Breaking by Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Often we think we have to do big things, and we're only conscious of what we haven't been able to do, what we're not managing, or what we're not managing very well. And as the late great Teresa of Calcutta once said, God does not expect, and I may not be quoting her accurately, so forgive me, but the sense of it is that God doesn't expect us to do great things. We're only expected to do small things with great love. And so I think we've had a nice trajectory of 3 poems. And oh, thank you, Marianne. We're on Yini Harrington. Do not go gently into that good night. Yes, that's one that I thought of and that I had. Do not go gentle into that good night. Do I have that in this one? Similar to Death, Be Not Proud. I did do Go Not Gently Into That Good Night. I think it's John Donne as well. I did that a couple of weeks ago, I believe. So it would be at Alba Technique YouTube page. So thank you so much for joining me. And if any of you have thoughts, comments, a poem that you would propose for me to approach, I would be particularly delighted if you would email us at albatechnique@gmail.com or suggest something in comments on Facebook. And we will absolutely approach the poem that you suggest. So thank you again for joining me. From Alba Technique, I am Patricia Angelin, and this is All the Feel.